Welcome to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point with me, Liu Xin. In this series, I dissect stories that are making headlines around the world and talk to my guests to compensate for the missing pieces of the puzzle. So join us, as always, in real time by sending us your comments or questions via the CGTN page on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or Weibo. If you're watching this live on the CGTN application, email us at thepointwithalex@cgtn.com. Let me know what you're thinking. And as usual, we start our live streaming every Friday at 11 a.m. Beijing time. So get in touch, and I just might read out your comments. Speaking of comments, well, we received some since last week's show. Some comments on social media and regarding China-US relations. The first one, well, not so positive, but we'll read it just as well. So Tintin lost in America. China rose cunningly, not peacefully. It fooled the world that it was becoming an open market like West countries, and some liberal leaders fell into the Chinese trap. China will not see the same good old days for sure. Watch, in next 10 years, China will become giant North Korea. Well, cunningly or not, that's an opinion, but no shots fired. That's a fact. There are a few people, I tell you, who have been making a living by predicting China's collapse, and they're still waiting. Tintin lost in America. You want to join them? Another comment by Franklin Smith, 60, peacefully, by bullying its neighbors like Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, Taiwan, etc., into forcing them to accept Chinese hegemony in international waters. Well, if China would have exercised hegemony, Asia would have a different name by now. That might be called China. So I don't think history proved you right. Finally, James Conway, IND, says since 1949, China has gone from feudalism to the space age and did so without waging frequent wars and robbing half of the world. China may not be perfect, but what other nations has lifted 800 million people out of poverty. China's record of achievement is admirable. So many thanks, but still a long way to go. Finally, by Brookman 65, US needs a paradigm shift in thinking. US is fundamentally unable to accept the fact that China has outcompeted them in 5G and other tech areas. US would rather start a war than admit losing the tech race. US under the Trump regime will lie, steal, and cheat, in Pompeo's words. Well, we have to make sure that those who lie, steal, and cheat, my words, does not shape history in any big way. Anyway, thanks for the feedback. I appreciated the criticism and the praise alike. Keep them coming. This week, we're going to unpack U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's recent speech on China and the barrage of criticism it has attracted in its wake. But instead of busting media, oh, good morning, Mr. Pompeo. Instead of busting media reports on the subject, we want to give credit to some pieces that have pointed out the speech's most glaring problems and flawed logic, all against the backdrop of inflamed U.S.-China relations. The speech, entitled Communist China and the Free World's Future, was made on July the 23rd, just a day after the U.S. abruptly ordered the closure of the Chinese consulate in Houston, Texas. Delivered from the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum in California, the speech made numerous references to the former U.S. president who, in 1972, traveled to China, ushering in a new chapter of relations between the two countries. Since the two countries established formal ties in 1979, relations have blossomed. Throughout the 1980s, for instance, normalized relations between the two, and China's economic reforms accelerated the exchange of goods, people, and ideas. U.S. companies were increasingly drawn to this huge market. Today, corporate America's operations in China raked in another $300 billion to $400 billion US dollars of revenue. Now, China's entry into the World Trade Organization in December 2001 was also a milestone in terms of shaping its economy, but also in Sino-American relations, as the U.S. was the prime mover in China's accession to the World Trade Organization. Now, in 1972, our annual bilateral trade was less than 100 million US dollars, and two-way investment in each other's markets was close to, guess much, zero. Now, today, the two countries are among each other's top trading partners. Statistics show that the U.S. trade in goods with China totaled over 700 billion US dollars in 2018. It also needs to be pointed out that China's effective system, governance, and the hard work of the Chinese people meant China could succeed once reintegrated into the world. Many other countries that have had this opportunity have not made the cut. Now, China and the U.S., of course, have their fair share of differences, different political systems, language, culture, and history. But despite these challenges, the two governments have emphasized their economic collaboration and mutual benefits, which has resulted in one of the most important, if not the most important, relationship of the 21st century. A relationship that concerns not only bilateral, but also global peace and prosperity. So a lot has changed between China and the United States over the past 50 years. Now, Nixon's legacy is palpable throughout Pompeo's speech. Before introducing Pompeo, the host even noted that on Nixon's grave there's an epitaph from his inaugural address that says the greatest honor history can bestow is the title of peacemaker. But judging from the U.S. Secretary of State's speech, not to mention actions, Pompeo seems to have no interest in such an honor. Instead, he seems intent on dismantling whatever is left of the China-U.S. relationship that his predecessors worked so hard to build over the last 5 decades. Rather than partners, he cast the two countries as rivals in a quest to win over the hearts and minds of the rest of the planet. But let's listen to how he describes the relationship in his own words.
Securing our freedoms from the Chinese Communist Party is the mission of our time. And America is perfectly positioned to lead it because our founding principles give us that opportunity.
So aside from tired cliches like this taken straight out of the U.S. warmongering handbook, his speech doesn't reflect a clear understanding of U.S. policy toward China. Luckily, there are foreign policy experts and students of history who can shed light on the big picture, keep the importance of this relationship in perspective, and put Pompeo in his place. And there are the media outlets that have given these analysis a platform. So this week, unlike what we used to do, I want to thank some international media for showcasing the other side of the story. First up, the Washington Post on July the 25th published the opinion piece, "What Mike Pompeo Doesn't Understand About China, Richard Nixon, and the U.S. Foreign Policy." Written by the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass, the piece calls out Pompeo's misrepresentation of history and his failure to suggest a coherent or viable path forward for managing a relationship that more than any other will define this era. Let's listen to how Pompeo, for instance, describes the inspiration behind Nixon's China engagement.
With that historic trip to Beijing, President Nixon kicked off our engagement strategy. He nobly sought a freer and safer world, and he hoped that the Chinese Communist Party would return that commitment.
Well, Haass's piece starts with an outright rebuttal of Pompeo's characterization of Nixon's China engagement policy 50 years ago, that it was a geopolitical play to use China as a counterweight to the former Soviet Union and shape China's foreign policy, not its internal nature. To the opposite of what Pompeo claimed to be a total failure, the engagement efforts have largely succeeded. More importantly, the U.S. has gained immensely from the leverage that contributed to the Cold War ending when and how it did. Haass also pointed out that China has not fought a war with another country since its 1979 border conflict with Vietnam, and the Taiwan Strait has been peaceful, which contributed to the region's economic success. Haass's most resounding rebuttal of the speech is in response to Pompeo's China strategy, which he describes as bound to fail. It is not within our power to determine China's future, much less transform it, Haass said. That goes Without saying, of course, China is a country of 1.4 billion people, 5,000 years of history, guys. Now, Haas also admitted that America needs to admit its own problems when it comes to accusing China's alleged human rights record. He argues America's voice would be much stronger if we practiced at home what we preached abroad. Very salient observation. President Trump and those who worked for him have forfeited much of their credibility as democracy advocates with their repeated descriptions of the U.S. media as an enemy of the people or as fake, their attacks on the independent judiciary, and their use of federal forces to repress dissidents in our cities. Now, this is a pretty powerful indictment of the Trump administration's own human rights records, don't you think? Incidentally, an opinion piece at The Atlantic on July the 25th, written by Thomas Wright at the Brookings Institution, echoes these exact same points. Entitled Pompeo's Surreal Speech on China, the article also more pointedly exposes the speech's inherent contradictions. For example, the piece says that in his speech, Pompeo says the U.S. will organize the free world while alienating and undermining the free world. He extols democracy while aiding and abetting its destruction at home. And he praises the Chinese people while generalizing about the ill intent of Chinese students who want to come to America. Every Chinese student might be a spy. Remember some people saying that? Especially, as the opinion piece says, Pompeo has some nerve to now claim that what is upside down is right side up. Wright goes on to proclaim that Pompeo is also ultra-loyal to a president who cares not one whit for democracy, dissidents, freedom, or transparency overseas. Pompeo's account, by contrast, is a Manichaean, politicized caricature, meaning thinking in black and white terms, overly simplistic and dichotomy views. Last, we'll look at Bloomberg's opinion piece by Robert Kaplan, titled China Doesn't Want to Conquer, Just Do Business, especially with respect to Pompeo's warnings of a maritime empire. Kaplan says Pompeo claims the purpose of China's armed forces is not to protect his homeland, but to expand a Chinese empire. Earlier, he used the phrase maritime empire. But Kaplan makes a good point when he says, whereas the U.S. has historically been a missionary power around the globe, proselytizing the ideals of democracy and human rights, China has no such impulses. That's right. China, both historically and now, has no expansion plan beyond its own territories and adjacent waters. As I said, otherwise, Asia might not have been called Asia, but have been called China by now. It is important to note that all three of these pieces also criticize elements of China and its political system, and the pieces did not dismiss the idea that there are real issues China and the U.S. must address. But the overarching point is that the top U.S. diplomat could have made a far more diplomatic and useful speech at such a critical moment. One more opportunity has been wasted, or shall I say, far more damage has been done. Is he still a diplomat or an ideological crusader? One more opinion piece I want to mention, this one published in the New York Times, and it was written by a molecular biologist living in China by the name of Rao Yi, about his family's experience, true experience with COVID-19. The title goes, My relatives in Wuhan survived. My uncle in New York did not. Now, the author talks about his family's history, some who immigrated to the U.S. and some who stayed in China, a picture that has become more interesting as coronavirus struck. The author says, our family has 12 members in Wuhan, mostly on my mother's side, and 6 in New York, mostly on my father's side. All my relatives in Wuhan are safe. Uncle Eric died in New York after the pandemic moved to the United States, the world's strongest country militarily, the richest economically, and the most advanced medically. I commend the New York Times for giving space to such a thought-provoking piece. Of course, the paper has been attacked for publishing this story. Pompeo called Rao Yi's view antithetical to the American way of life, and that the New York Times was propagating Chinese propaganda. Rao Yi simply told the true story of what happened to his relatives. What is not, then? And my dear friends, what would you call this? Listen to this.
I can tell you that there is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan.
Now, 92 days have passed since he said this on TV, and we've yet to see a single shred of evidence. Same question to President Trump, too. We're waiting for the truth from this administration.